They told him his hands were made for holding a mop, not a patent. They told him to keep his eyes on the floor and his mouth shut. But when a billion-dollar company faced total collapse, it wasn't the PhDs who saved them, it was the man emptying their trash cans. This is the story of Marcus Holloway, and how one invention silenced a room full of critics. Please subscribe and like to support the channel. The headquarters of Aura Motors was a cathedral of glass and steel, a testament to modern engineering. Inside, the air was always cool, filtered, and smelled faintly of ozone and espresso. For the 3,000 employees working in the R&D wing, it was the smell of progress. For Marcus Holloway, it was just the smell of Tuesday. Marcus was 62 years old, with hair the color of steel wool and hands that felt like cracked leather. He wore the gray jumpsuit of the facility's management team. To the engineers in their pristine white lab coats and the executives in their Italian suits, Marcus was part of the architecture, visible only when something was broken or dirty, and invisible the moment it was fixed. Aura Motors was in crisis. Their flagship project, the Titan battery cell, was supposed to revolutionize the electric trucking industry. But there was a problem. During high-load stress tests, the thermal regulation units kept failing. The batteries weren't just getting hot, they were turning into bombs. "It's a flow rate issue," screamed Preston Sterling, the head of engineering. Preston was 34, a prodigy from MIT who wore his arrogance like cologne. He was standing in the middle of the main lab, berating a team of junior developers. "The coolant isn't cycling fast enough through the microchannels. Increase the pressure." "We can't, sir," a young woman stammered. "If we increase the pressure any further, the seals will burst. We're at maximum tolerance." "Then redesign the seals," Preston shouted, throwing a tablet onto a nearby desk. It skidded across the surface and knocked over a cup of coffee, sending dark liquid splashing onto the pristine white floor. Preston sighed, pinching the bridge of his nose. He looked up and snapped his fingers without looking. "Maintenance. Clean up on aisle incompetent." Marcus was already there. He had been changing a fluorescent bulb nearby. He descended his ladder slowly, his knees popping audibly in the silence of the lab. He fetched his cart, pulled out the mop, and began to clean the spill. As he mopped, Marcus looked at the schematic displayed on the massive wall monitor. It was a complex diagram of the battery cooling system. He paused, his eyes tracing the jagged lines of the intake valves. "You got a problem with the floor, old man?" Preston asked, his voice dripping with condescension. Marcus looked up, his face impassive. "No, sir. Just looking at the loop." Preston scoffed, looking around at his team for a laugh. "Oh, he's looking at the loop. Well, unless you can mop up thermal dynamics with that thing, keep moving. We have real work to do." Marcus squeezed the mop into the bucket. "It's not the pressure," he muttered, almost to himself. "It's the turbulence. The 90-degree angle on the intake creates cavitation. Air bubbles. Air doesn't cool." Preston froze. He turned slowly. "Excuse me? What did you say?" "I said," Marcus straightened his back, meeting the younger man's eyes, "you're pushing liquid too hard into a sharp turn. It's churning. Like water hitting a rock in a creek. You don't need more pressure, you need a curved intake. Smooth the flow." The room went deadly silent. The junior engineers looked from Marcus to Preston, eyes wide. Preston's face turned a shade of red that matched the warning lights on the battery rig. He walked up to Marcus, invading his personal space. "Listen to me very closely. I have 3 degrees. You have a mop. If I want advice on how to get a coffee stain out of tile, I'll ask you. Until then, get out of my lab before I have you fired for espionage." Marcus held his gaze for a second longer, then nodded once. "Just trying to help, sir." He pushed his cart away, the squeaky wheel echoing in the silent lab. That night, the CEO of Aura Motors, Elias Thorne, was the only one left on the executive floor. Elias was a man carrying the weight of the world. The company's stock had dropped 15% in a week due to rumors of the battery failure. If they didn't fix the thermal issue before the innovation fair in 2 weeks, Aura Motors would lose its government contracts. They would be finished. Elias rubbed his temples and walked out of his office to get a glass of water. He decided to walk down to the factory floor to clear his head. He liked the machines. They were honest. They either worked, or they didn't. As he passed the machine shop, a gritty area usually reserved for fixing forklifts and conveyor belts, he saw a light on. He approached quietly. Inside, amidst the smell of grease and metal shavings, sat Marcus. He wasn't wearing his jumpsuit. He was in a flannel shirt, hunched over a workbench. Elias watched from the shadows. Marcus was holding a piece of PVC pipe. He was heating it with a blowtorch, carefully bending it into a strange, organic S-shape. Next to him was a small aquarium pump and a clear plastic tub of water with red dye in it. Marcus connected his bent pipe to the pump. He turned it on. The red water shot through the tube smoothly, looping back into the tub without a single splash or bubble. Then, he switched the pipe for a standard L-shaped connector, the kind used in the battery prototype. He turned the pump on. The water sputtered, hissed, and foamed. "Cavitation," Elias whispered. Marcus jumped, nearly knocking over the torch. He turned, eyes wide, expecting security. When he saw the CEO, he stood up quickly, wiping his hands on a rag. "Mr. Thorne." I was just finishing up. I'll clock out now. Elias walked into the shop, ignoring the grease on the floor. He looked at the primitive test rig. You're the maintenance lead. Marcus, right? Yes, sir. Marcus Holloway. Marcus, what are you doing? Marcus looked down at his boots. Just tinkering, sir. Trying to understand something. Elias pointed to the S-shaped pipe. That's a non-turbulent flow adapter. Where did you learn fluid dynamics? Marcus chuckled softly, a dry, raspy sound. I didn't go to school for it, Mr. Thorne. I worked on oil rigs in the Gulf for 15 years before my back gave out. When you pump mud and sludge from 3 miles down, you learn about flow. If the pipe bends too sharp, the pipe blows. Physics is physics, whether it's mud or high-tech coolant. Elias picked up the S-pipe. It was crude, scorched by the torch, but the geometry was elegant. Preston says the problem is pressure. Preston is looking at the numbers on a screen, Marcus said, his voice gaining confidence. He ain't listening to the machine. The machine is screaming, sir. It's choking on its own bubbles. Elias looked at Marcus. Really looked at him. He saw the intelligence in the man's eyes, the weary patience of someone who had been underestimated his entire life. The innovation fair is in 14 days, Elias said. Every department is submitting a proposal to save the Titan project. The winner gets a $50,000 bonus and a permanent seat on the R&D council. Marcus nodded. I heard. Mr. Sterling is betting the farm on a new alloy pump. I want you to enter, Elias said. The silence in the shop was heavier than the machinery. Marcus stared at the CEO. With all due respect, sir, look at me. I'm the janitor. I'm black. I'm 62. And I don't have a degree. They won't let me in the door. I'm the CEO, Elias said, a small smile playing on his lips. I hold the keys to the door. You enter. You build this, but for the battery. Can you do it? Marcus looked at the plastic tube, then back at Elias. A spark lit up in his eyes, a fire that had been banked down for decades. I can do it. But I need parts. And I need access to the scrap yard. You have full access, Elias said. But Marcus? Keep this quiet. If Preston finds out, he'll shut you down before you start. The next 2 weeks were a blur of exhaustion and adrenaline. Marcus worked his shifts during the day, mopping floors and plunging toilets, enduring the sneers of the engineering staff. But at night, he became an inventor. He didn't have the budget for titanium or carbon fiber. He went to the company scrapyard, the graveyard, where failed prototypes went to die. He found the discarded casing of a failed turbine. He found copper tubing from an old HVAC unit. He found magnets from a broken conveyor belt motor. Marcus wasn't just building a pipe, he was building a magnetic resonance flow stabilizer. He realized that by spiraling the coolant and using magnets to align the ions in the liquid, he could reduce friction to almost zero. It was a concept he had thought of years ago while watching water drain out of a sink, but he never had the reason to build it. 3 days before the fair, Preston Sterling cornered Marcus in the hallway. I hear you've been spending a lot of time in the machine shop late at night, Holloway, Preston sneered. Stealing copper wire to sell? Marcus gripped his mop handle. Fixing the floor buffer, sir. It's been acting up. Preston stepped closer, lowering his voice. I don't know what game you're playing with Thorne, but stay in your lane. You're here to clean the toilets, not the tech. If you embarrass this company at the fair, I'll make sure you never work in this town again. I understand, sir, Marcus said calmly. As Preston walked away, Marcus muttered, I'm not doing it for the company. I'm doing it for the machine. The day of the innovation fair arrived. The grand atrium of Aura Motors was transformed into a tech expo. Investors, military generals, and tech journalists milled about, sipping champagne. Booths were set up in a large circle. At the center was a stage with a large screen. Preston Sterling's booth was the largest. It featured a gleaming, chrome-plated pump system labeled the Sterling Injector. It looked expensive. It looked futuristic. In the far back corner, near the fire exit, was a small table draped with a plain black cloth. Marcus stood behind it. He wasn't wearing a tuxedo. He was wearing his Sunday best, a suit he had bought for his daughter's wedding 10 years ago. It was a little tight in the shoulders, but his shoes were polished to a mirror shine. On the table sat his device. It looked odd. It was a bulbous, spiraling knot of copper and scavenged steel, roughly welded but polished clean. It looked like a steampunk heart. People walked past Marcus without stopping. They saw an older black man standing by the exit and assumed he was security or event staff. Preston walked by with a group of board members. He saw Marcus and laughed loudly. Ladies and gentlemen, look. Even our janitorial staff is getting into the spirit. What is that, Holloway? A new way to unclog the executive washroom? The board members chuckled. One of them, a man named Vance, looked at Marcus with pity. Good initiative, Marcus. Maybe stick to the cleaning, though. Marcus didn't flinch. He stood with his hands clasped behind his back. It's a thermal regulator, sir. Preston rolled his eyes. Okay, let's move on to the real science. The presentations began. One by one, engineers presented complex, expensive solutions. Most failed the live stress test. The batteries overheated, software crashed, seals burst. Finally, it was Preston's turn. He walked onto the stage with the swagger of a rock star. The Stirling injector, he announced, uses brute force physics to conquer heat. They hooked his device up to the test battery. The massive screen showed the temperature gauge. The battery began to charge. The temperature rose. The Stirling injector roared to life, sounding like a jet engine. It was loud, impressive. The temperature held steady for 30 seconds. Then, it began to creep up. 80 degrees Celsius. 90. 100. Increase power. Preston yelled. The machine screamed louder. Suddenly, a seal blew. High-pressure coolant sprayed across the stage, soaking Preston's shoes. The screen flashed red, critical failure. The room gasped. The investors began to whisper furiously. The company stock was dropping in real time. Elias Thorne walked onto the stage. He looked tired. He took the microphone. Is there anyone else? The room was silent. The engineers looked at their feet. I have an entry, a deep voice boomed from the back. The crowd parted. Marcus Holloway walked down the center aisle. He carried his strange copper device in his hands. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Is that the janitor? What is he doing? Someone stop him. Preston wiped coolant off his face and stepped forward. Security. Get him out of here. This is a humiliation. Let him speak. Elias Thorne's voice cracked like a whip over the sound system. Let him speak. Marcus stepped onto the stage. He placed his device on the podium. He didn't have a PowerPoint. He didn't have fancy graphics. My name is Marcus, he said, his voice steady. I fix things. Mr. Stirling tried to force the fluid. He tried to beat the heat into submission. But nature doesn't like to be forced. Nature likes to flow. He hooked his device to the battery rig. It fit perfectly. Turn it on, Marcus said. The technician looked at Elias. Elias nodded. The battery began to charge. The current ramped up. The room waited for the noise. They waited for the roar of pumps. But there was silence. The only sound was a faint, rhythmic hum, like a cat purring. On the screen, the temperature gauge rose, and stopped. 40 degrees Celsius. It stayed there. Increase the load to 150%, Marcus said. That's impossible, Preston shouted from the side. It will explode. Do it, Elias ordered. The load increased. The battery was now pushing out enough energy to power a city block. The temperature gauge didn't move. 40 degrees. The fluid was moving through Marcus's spiral loop so efficiently, so perfectly, that the heat was dissipating instantly. The magnetic resonance aligns the fluid molecules, Marcus explained to the stunned room. It removes the friction. No friction, no heat buildup. It costs about $50 to make. The silence stretched for 10 seconds. It was broken by a single person clapping. It was Elias. Then the board members joined in. Then the investors. Suddenly, the entire room was on its feet, thunderous applause echoing off the glass walls. Preston Stirling stood alone in a puddle of coolant, watching the man he had called trash save his career. 2 hours later, the champagne was flowing, but this time, people were toasting Marcus. Contracts were being signed. The stock price had just jumped 20%. Elias found Marcus standing by the buffet table, looking a bit overwhelmed. You did it, Marcus, Elias said, handing him a glass. The machine did it, sir. I just listened to it. Elias shook his head. No. You did it. And I have an announcement to make. Elias tapped his glass with a spoon. The room quieted down. Ladies and gentlemen, Elias said. Today, Aura Motors was saved not by money and not by ego. We were saved by observation and humility. Effective immediately, Preston Stirling is relieved of his duties. Preston, standing in the back, went pale. And, Elias continued, putting a hand on Marcus's shoulder, I am naming Marcus Holloway as the new Director of Innovation and Quality Assurance. Marcus's eyes went wide. Mr. Thorne, I can't. I don't have the degrees. Marcus, Elias said, loud enough for everyone to hear, you just taught a room full of PhDs that they didn't know anything. You have the only degree that matters, results. Marcus Holloway worked at Aura Motors for another 10 years. He didn't fire the engineers who had mocked him, he taught them. He taught them to put down their tablets and listen to the machines. He taught them that the person emptying the trash might just be the smartest person in the room. And in the lobby of Aura Motors, right next to the shiny new electric trucks, stands a glass case. Inside, sitting on a velvet pillow, is a crude, S-shaped copper pipe, a reminder that innovation is everywhere, if you only have the humility to look for it. If this story inspired you, please hit that like button, it really helps the channel grow. And if you want more stories about justice being served and the underdog coming out on top, subscribe and turn on notifications. What do you think? Was Preston's punishment fair? Let me know in the comments below.